Good evening. My name is Beverly Gologowsky. It's an honor to be here. Readers often have an itch to know who is this person whose books so affect our lives. I'm here to tell you a bit of the answer. I've known Elizabeth Strout for almost 20 years, heretofore referred to as Liz. Her sense of humor is as instantaneous as her empathy. As a woman, as well as a writer, Liz plows deep into the marrow of life. I don't doubt that she creates from this source as well. In my old South Bronx neighborhood, this would be dubbed twice blessed. She is a woman and a writer without conceit. How is that possible? Aren't writers alleged to be, if not obsessed, then surely concerned with attention, feedback, etc.? Yet Liz is content to just hole up alone in a room for years to write one book at a time, just hoping that her work will mean something to someone, somewhere, at some time that she may never know about, which is fine with her, more than fine. This is enough for her, which is not to overlook how long and hard she works to create such memorable characters as Olive Kittredge and Lucy Barton, to name only two. At book readings, people often ask writers to speak of where they work, studio, bedroom, etc. I can easily say that Liz carries her workroom with her at all times. It's the ear she keeps to every door, along with the eye for the small, daily, overlooked details that make up a life. People also ask, when does she work? Morning, noon, night? The answer is always. Her work ethic reminds me of an anecdote I once heard about Bernard Malamud, who years ago was a guest at the Yaddo Writing Colony. Upon hearing troubling and unusual sounds coming from Mr. Malamud's room, his neighbor decided to check on him. He knocked at the door to ask if everything was okay. Mr. Malamud assured him that he was fine, but that his characters were giving him a hard time. I can tell you that Liz, too, tussles with her characters, and they often claim victory in the struggle. She is a writer who learns from her characters. How odd, you may say, but it is an element of why her work is so perceptive, moving, and persuasive. Fictional characters are composites of many different human beings, which includes the writer herself. The muse, though, is quite canny, and unless a writer has an ability to feel deeply, the muse will not speak through the silence. Liz feels deeply about a great deal, about people in general, the condition of their lives, whether or not they will manage the day or the week. She worries about what we are all living through, and she is able to always sense what is going on beneath the surface. Without these attributes, creating a powerful novel would be difficult. There are times when it has occurred to me that Liz must have lived previous lives because of the myriad experiences revealed in her work. From Liz's vantage point, giving recognizable life to a fictional character is a duty and hopefully a gift to readers to use as they will. From my vantage point, it has been and remains wonderful to know someone who is so present and caring and to be the lucky beneficiary of her brilliant counsel. It is my privilege and honor to introduce to you Elizabeth Strout.
Hi. I'm going to read to you the first few pages of the first story of Anything is Possible. Tommy Guptill had once owned a dairy farm, which he'd inherited from his father, and which was about 2 miles from the town of Amgash, Illinois. This was many years ago now, but at night, Tommy still sometimes woke with a fear he had felt the night his dairy farm burned to the ground. The house had burned to the ground as well. The wind had sent sparks onto the house, which was not far from the barns. It had been his fault. He always thought that it had been his fault because he had not checked that night on the milking machines to make sure they had been turned off properly, and this is where the fire started. Once it started, it ripped with a fury over the whole place. They lost everything except for the brass frame to the living room mirror, which he came upon in the rubble the next day, and he left it where it was. A collection was taken up. For a number of weeks, his kids went to school in the clothes of their classmates until he could gather himself and the little money he had. He sold the land to the neighboring farmer, but it did not bring much money in. Then he and his wife, a short, pretty woman named Shirley, bought new clothes, and he bought a house as well, Shirley keeping her spirits up admirably as all this was going on. They'd had to buy a house in Amgash, which was a run-down town, and his kids went to school there instead of in Carlisle, where they had been able to go to school before, his farm being just on the line dividing the two towns. Tommy took a job as the janitor in the Amgash school system. The steadiness of the job appealed to him, and he could never go to work on someone else's farm. He did not have the stomach for that. He was 35 years old at the time. The kids were grown now, with kids of their own who were also grown, and he and Shirley still lived in their small house. She had planted flowers around it, which was unusual in that town. Tommy had worried a good deal about his children at the time of the fire. They had gone from having their home be a place that class trips came to. Each year in spring, the 5th grade class from Carlisle would make a day of it, eating their lunches out beside the barns on the wooden tables there, then tromping through the barns watching the men milking the cows, the white foamy stuff going up and over them in the clear plastic pipes, to having to see their father as the man who pushed the broom over the magic dust that got tossed over the throw-up of some kid who had been sick in the hallways, Tommy wearing his gray pants and a white shirt that had Tommy stitched on it in red. Well, they had all lived through it. This morning, Tommy drove slowly to the town of Carlisle for errands. It was a sunny Saturday in May, and his wife's 82nd birthday was just a few days away. All around him were open fields, the corn newly planted and the soybeans too. A number of fields were still brown, as they'd been plowed under for their planting, but mostly there was the high blue sky with a few white clouds scattered near the horizon. He drove past the sign on the road that led to the Barton home. It still said sewing and alterations, even though the woman, Lydia Barton, who did the sewing and alterations, had died many years ago. The Barton family had been outcasts, even in a town like Amgash, their extreme poverty and strangeness making this so. The oldest child, a man named Pete, lived alone there now. The middle child was 2 towns away, and the youngest, Lucy Barton, had fled many years ago and had ended up living in New York City. Tommy had spent time thinking of Lucy. All those years she had lingered after school, alone in the classroom, from 4th grade right up to her senior year in high school. It had taken her a few years to even look him in the eye. But now Tommy was driving past the area where his farm had been. These days it was all fields, not a sign of the farm was left, and he thought, as he often thought, about his life back then. It had been a good life, but he did not regret the things that had happened. It was not Tommy's nature to regret things. And on the night of the fire, in the midst of his galloping fear, he understood that all that mattered in this world were his wife and his children. And he thought that people lived their whole lives not knowing this as sharply and constantly as he did. Privately, he thought of the fire as a sign from God to keep this gift tightly to him. Privately, because he did not want to be thought of as a man who made up excuses for a tragedy, and he did not want anyone, not even his dearly beloved wife, to think that he would do this. But he had felt that night, while his wife kept the children over by the road, he had rushed them from the house when he saw that the barn was on fire. As he watched the enormous flames flying into the nighttime sky, then heard the terrible screaming sounds of the cows as they died. He had felt many things. But it was just as the roof of his house crashed in, fell into the house itself, right into their bedrooms and the living room below with all the photos of the children and his parents. As he saw this happen, he felt, undeniably, what he could only think was the presence of God. And he understood why angels had always been portrayed as having wings, because there had been a sensation of that, of a rushing sound, or not even a sound, and then it was as though God, who had no face, but was God, pressed up against him and conveyed to him without words, so briefly, so fleetingly, some message that Tommy understood to be, "It's all right, Tommy." And then Tommy had understood that it was all right. It was beyond his understanding, but it was all right. And it had been. He often thought that his children had become more compassionate as a result of having to go to school with kids who were poor and not from homes like the one they had first known. He had felt the presence of God since, at times, as though a golden color was very near to him, but he never felt again visited by God as he had felt that night, and he knew too well what people would make of it, and this is why he would keep it to himself until his dying day, the sign from God. Still, on a spring morning as this one was, the smell of the soil brought back to him the smells of the cows, the moisture of their nostrils, the warmth of their bellies, and his barns. He had had 2 barns. And he let his mind roll over pieces of scenes that came to him. Perhaps because he had just passed the Barton place, he thought of the man, Ken Barton, who had been the father of those poor, sad children, and who had worked on and off for Tommy. And then he thought, as he more often did, of Lucy, who had left for college and then ended up in New York City. She had become a writer. Lucy Barton. Driving, Tommy shook his head slightly. Tommy knew many things as a result of being the janitor in that school more than 30 years. He knew of girls' pregnancies and drunken mothers and cheating spouses, for he overheard these things talked about by the students in their small huddles by the bathrooms or near the cafeteria. In many ways, he was invisible. He understood that. But Lucy Barton had troubled him the most. She and her sister Vicky and her brother Pete had been viciously scorned by the other kids and by some of the teachers too. Yet because Lucy stayed after school so often for so many years, he felt, though she seldom spoke, that he knew her the best. One time when she was in the 4th grade, it was his first year working there, he had opened the door to a classroom and found her lying on the 3 chairs pushed together over near the radiators, her coat as a blanket, fast asleep. He had stared at her, watching her chest move slightly up and down, seeing the dark circles beneath her eyes, her eyelashes spread like tiny twinkling stars, for her eyelids had been moist as though she had been weeping before she slept, and then he backed out quietly, slowly as he could. It had felt almost unseemly to have come upon her like that. He pulled up to a stop sign now and said the words aloud to himself quietly, "Lucy, Lucy, Lucy B., where did you go to? How did you flee?" He knew how. In the spring of her senior year, he had seen her in the hallway after school, and she had said to him, so suddenly open-faced, her eyes big, "Oh, Mr. Guptill, I'm going to college." And he had said, "Lucy, that's wonderful." She had thrown her arms around him. She would not let go, and so he hugged her back. He always remembered that hug because she had been so thin. He could feel her bones and her small breasts, and because he wondered later how much, how little, that girl had ever been hugged. Tommy pulled away from the stop sign and drove into the town. Right there beyond was a parking space. Tommy pulled in to get it, got out of his car and squinted in the sunlight. "Tommy Guptill," shouted a man, and turning, Tommy saw Griff Johnson walking toward him with his characteristic limp. For Griff had one leg that was shorter than the other, and even his built-up shoe could not keep him from limping. Griff had an arm out, ready to shake hands. "Griffith," said Tommy, and they pumped their arms for a long time while the cars drove slowly past them down Main Street. Griff was the insurance man here in town, and he'd been awfully good to Tommy. Griff had said, "I met you too late," when he found out that Tommy had not insured his farm for its worth. But Griff, with his warm face and big belly now, continued to be good to Tommy. As a breeze moved around them, they spoke of their children and grandchildren. Griff had a grandson who was on drugs, which Tommy thought was very sad, and he just listened and nodded, glancing up the trees that lined Main Street, their leaves so young and bright green. And then he listened about another grandson who was in medical school now, and Tommy said, "Hey, that's just great. Good for him." And they clapped hands on each other's shoulders and moved on. Tommy walked up to the bookstore. He thought there might be a gardening book his wife would like. Once he was inside, he walked about, then saw right there in the middle of the store a display of a new Lucy Barton book. He picked it up. It had on its cover a city building. Then he looked at the back flap where her picture was. He thought he wouldn't recognize her if he met her now. He put the book back on the display and went to find the sales clerk to ask about a book on gardening. "I might have just the thing. We just got this in," said the girl, who was not really a girl, except they all seemed like girls to Tommy these days. She brought out a book with a hyacinth on the cover, and he said, "Oh, that's perfect." The girl asked if he wanted it wrapped, and he said yes, that would be great, and he watched while she spread the silver paper around it with her fingernails that were painted blue. And with her tongue sticking slightly out between her teeth as she concentrated, she put the Scotch tape on, then gave him a big smile when it was done. "That's perfect," he repeated, and she said, "You have a nice day now." And he told her the same. He started his car and pulled out of the parking space, starting back down the road toward home. The Johnson boy came to Tommy's mind, how he couldn't get off drugs. And then Tommy thought of his older brother who had died a few years back. And he thought how his brother, who had been in World War II, who had been at the camps when they were being emptied, he thought how his brother had returned from the war a different man. His marriage ended, his children disliked him. Not long before his brother died, he told Tommy about what he had seen in the camps and how he and the others had the job of taking the townspeople through them. They had somehow taken a group of women from the town through the camps to show them what had been right there, and Tommy's brother said that although some of the women wept, some of them put their chins up and looked angry, as if they refused to be made to feel bad. This image had always stayed with Tommy, and he wondered why it came to him now. He unrolled the window all the way down. It seemed the older he grew, and he had grown old, the more he understood that he could not understand this confusing contest between good and evil, and that maybe people on earth were not meant to understand these things. But as he approached the sign that declared sewing and alterations, he slowed his car and turned down the long road that led to the Barton place. Tommy had made a practice of checking in on Pete Barton, who of course was not a kid now, but an older man ever since Ken, Pete's father, had died. Pete had stayed living in the house alone, and Tommy had not seen him for a couple of months. Down the long road he drove. It was isolated out here, a thing he and Shirley had discussed over the years, isolation not being a good thing for those kids. There were cornfields on one side and soybean fields on the other. The truck was there next to the small house, which had not been painted in so many years it looked washed out, the shingles pale, some missing. The blinds were drawn, as they always were, and Tommy got out of his car and went and knocked on the door. Anyway, sorry. Standing in the sunshine, he thought again of Lucy Barton, how she had been a skinny child, painfully so, and her hair was long and blonde, and almost never did she look him in the eye. Once, when she was still so young, he had walked into a classroom after school and found her sitting there reading, and she had jumped. He saw her really jump with fear. When the door opened, he had said to her quickly, "No, you're fine." But it was that day, seeing the way she jumped, seeing the terror that crossed her face, when he guessed that she must have been beaten at home. She would have had to have been in order to get so scared at the opening of a door. After he realized this, he took more notice of her, and there were days he saw what seemed to be a bruise, yellow or bluish, on her neck, on her arms. He told his wife about it, and Shirley said, "What should we do, Tommy?" And he thought about it, and she thought about it, and they decided they would do nothing. But the day they discussed this was the day Tommy told his wife what he had seen Ken Barton, Lucy's father, do years before when Tommy had his dairy farm and Ken worked on the machinery at times. Tommy had walked out behind one of the barns and seen Ken Barton with his pants down by his ankles, pulling on himself, swearing. What a thing to have come upon. Tommy said, "None of that out here, Ken." And the man turned around and got into his truck and drove off, and he did not return to work for a week. "Tommy, why didn't you tell me this?" Shirley's blue eyes looked at him with horror, and Tommy said it seemed too awful to repeat. "Tommy, we need to do something," his wife said that day, and they talked about it more and decided once again there was nothing they could do. The blind moved slightly, and then the door opened, and Pete Barton stood there. "Hello, Tommy," he said. Pete stepped outside into the sunshine, closing the door behind him, and stood next to Tommy. "Just driving by. Thought I'd see how you were doing." Tommy said this casually. "Thanks. I'm okay. Thank you." In the bright sun, Pete's face looked pale, and his hair was almost all gray now, but it was a pale gray, and it seemed to match the pale shingles of the house he stood in front of. "You're working over at the Dar place?" Tommy asked. Pete said he was, though that job was almost done, but he had another lined up in Hanston. "Good." Tommy squinted toward the horizon, all soybean fields in front of him, the bright green of them showing in the brown soil. Pete leaned against Tommy's car, his arms folded against his chest. He was a tall man, but his chest seemed almost concave. He was that thin. "Were you in the war, Tommy?" Tommy was surprised at the question. "No," he said. "No, I was too young, just missed it. My older brother was, though." "Where was he?" Pete asked. Tommy hesitated. Then he said, "He was assigned to the camps at the end of the war. He was in the corps that went to the camps in Buchenwald." Tommy looked up at the sky, reached into his pocket, pulled out his sunglasses, and slipped them on his face. After a moment, Pete Barton turned toward Tommy. In a voice without belligerence, even with a touch of apology to it, he said, "Look, Tommy, I'd like it if you didn't keep coming over here." Tommy was not sure he heard right, but as he started to say, Pete looked at him fleetingly and said, "You do it to torture me, and I think enough time has gone by now." Tommy pushed himself away from the car and stood straight. "Torture you?" Tommy asked. "Pete, I'm not here to torture you." "Okay, forget I said that. I'm sorry." Pete's head ducked down. "I'd just like to check on you every so often," Tommy said. "You know, neighbor to neighbor. You live here all alone. Seems to me a neighbor should check on you once in a while." They stood, the two of them, Tommy's arms unfolded now. He slipped his hands into his pockets, and Pete slipped his hands into his as well. "The Petersons should take that tree away. I don't know why they don't. It's one thing to plow around it when it was standing up straight, but now, sheesh. They're going to," I heard them talking. Tommy did not quite know what to do, and this was an odd feeling for him. Pete said, "My father was in the war. He got all screwed up." Now Pete turned and looked at Tommy, his eyes squinting in the sunshine. "When he was dying, he told me about it. It was terrible what happened to him, and then he shot these 2 German guys. He didn't know they were soldiers. He didn't think they were. They were almost kids, but he told me he felt every day of his life that he should have killed himself in return." Tommy listened to this, looking at the boy, the man, without his sunglasses, which he held in his hand in his pocket. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't know your father was in the war. My father," and here Pete unmistakably had tears in his eyes, "my father was a decent man, Tommy." Tommy nodded slowly. "He did things because he couldn't control himself, and so Pete turned away. In a moment, he turned partway back to Tommy and said, "And so he went in and turned on those milking machines that night, and then the place burned down, and I never, ever forgot it, Tommy. It was like I knew he had done it, and I know you know that too." Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jess Strout. It's a great honor to introduce John Edgar Wideman tonight. As I'm sure most of you know, John Edgar Wideman's career now spans 5 decades. From his first novels, A Glance Away and Hurry Home, which were published in the 1970s, to his latest collection of short stories, which we're celebrating now, published just last month. There are people here, I'm sure, who have followed his work from the very beginning, and others who came to him through his best-known novels, Sent for You Yesterday and Philadelphia Fire, which both won the PEN Faulkner Award, or his much-acclaimed memoirs, Brothers and Keepers and Farther Along, or his short story Fever, which appears in many, many creative writing anthologies, short story anthologies. Perhaps some of you picked up the thread of his work with his last book, Writing to Save a Life, which traces the faint outlines left by Lewis Till, the father of Emmett Till. And it may be that one or two of you first encountered him in the 1990s in a supporting role in the wonderful book, In These Girls, Hope is a Muscle, which is about his daughter Jamila's high school basketball team. Jamila went on to play for the WNBA. There's a line in that book I've always remembered where one of Jamila's teammates turns to him and says, "Professor Wideman, I read your book, Jungle Fever, but I didn't really understand it." And he turns to her and says, It's fever. It's okay. As a father now, I understand exactly how it feels when your work takes a back seat in your children's lives, if it's even in the car at all. I want to very briefly tell the story of how I first encountered John Edgar Wideman. When I was a teenager and an aspiring writer in 1992, I stumbled across one of his short stories in a literary journal, which I believe no longer exists, called Witness. I bought the journal basically because I liked the way the cover looked. I'd never heard of any of the writers in it. I was probably also immediately struck by the title of the story, which is Newborn Thrown in Trash and Dies. In Baltimore in 1992, that was a headline you might see on any given day. What I wasn't prepared for was a story that began in the voice of the newborn, which is also a voice from the beyond. The term I use for this with my writing students is ex morte, meaning a narration that begins after the character has died. Newborn Thrown in Trash and Dies begins like this. They say you see your whole life pass in review the instant before you die. How would they know? If you die after the instant replay, you aren't around to tell anybody anything. So much for they and what they say. The funny thing about being a very young writer or artist of any kind is that you constantly experience things out of order. You start where you are in the moment when you first start becoming interested in art, with a shock of being introduced to the present, that special feeling you get when you come face to face with what Gertrude Stein once called the inner time sense of our contemporaneousness. That was what I felt in 1992 when I read that short story. I didn't know enough then even to be able to guess at John Edgar Wideman's influences, Joyce and Ellison and Faulkner, Beckett and Baldwin and James Weldon Johnson. I couldn't imagine how to place him among his contemporaries, Toni Morrison, Don DeLillo, James Allen McPherson, Cormac McCarthy, Maxine Hong Kingston. But his work was so intense and demanding that it drew me into that world. In a very palpable sense, John Edgar Wideman's work was the beginning of my real literary education. So it's with gratitude and endless respect that I welcome John Edgar Wideman to the stage today.
Good evening. These are difficult times, and I'm happy that we can share a few moments together doing something we like. You listening to a story, me reading a story, and I'm happy to share the podium with Liz. I am going to read from my new book. It's always fun to read from the newest stuff. It hasn't turned sour yet. Still think it might have some worth if you're the writer. But I'm just going to read from a story called Nat Turner Confesses. And because of time constraints, I won't read all 7,000 pages of it, but only from 151 to about 159. So that's all that's required of you, to sit that long, and me to stay in voice for that long. Nat Turner Confesses. Nat Turner, no stranger to me, The grad school education I'd been privileged to receive in the early 1960s included an American Studies course which mentioned slave revolts and named a few slaves responsible for bloody, short-lived, essentially futile outbreaks of violence that occurred before Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War ended legal slavery in America. My curiosity led me to discover a handful of radical left-wing scholars who specialized in uncovering and preserving evidence of slave resistance to bondage. Thanks to the research of those scholars, I learned more about Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner, etc., and rebellions they had perpetrated. More information, of course, piqued my curiosity for more, but not the kind of curiosity that killed the cat. My good liberal education was also instilling moderation, instructing me how to divide and conquer. Divide and conquer myself first, a very large, unforgiving, ruthless world out there, and no one, especially some lucky someone like me, who had been granted a special pass to enter places reserved for people not my color, could afford to squander time and resources on projects leading nowhere, except to the dead ends of history, to dead people buried in the rubble who had wasted their lives in hopeless quests. Nat Turner addresses the spectators with silence. A goodly number had turned out to see him hanged, and he is pleased. The more of them shivering under a slight drizzle this dismal morning, the easier it is for him to say nothing. Easier to wish he'd begun the work of killing them sooner, these strangers and the few he might recognize if he cast his eyes about the throng, dark faces here and there among white faces, he's sure the ones ordered by masters to attend this edifying spectacle, or dark faces peeking curious, wide-eyed, pretending to be invisible at the edges of the crowd, and though he blinds himself to it, he hears and smells the mob fragrant as the pig yard, where someone, not him, thank goodness, must be shoveling mud and shit already at this hour. A rabble boiling around the hasty scaffold, this cross erected in a farmer's field just beyond Jerusalem. So many white faces, it's easier to forgive himself and his band for not completing the work of eliminating them all, every single one, as he'd conceived in his plan and exhorted the others, returning in one instance to a ransacked dwelling strewn with corpses of a family they had just murdered to bash in the skull of an infant girl he remembered they'd missed in an upstairs nursery. One by one, every single one of them, every single guilty one of them, man, woman, child, slaughtered until he and his recruits had emptied Southampton, Virginia, the entire world, or until they themselves cut down. Not a word Nat Turner wishes to speak to anyone today, not a person he wishes to see, only the dead, his loyal troops who did not survive, scores of innocent colored folk, men, women, children, rounded up on plantations from village streets, swamps, woods, and rumored to have paid with their lives for his sins. The Emmets and Trayvons, murdered as if guilty of riding with Nat Turner that August night of killing, and yes, oh yes, speak a last word to his poor wife, beaten unmercifully until she produced, they say, odd papers written in blood, then stripped and whipped again, as if a flesh and blood woman whose husband, long a ghost to her, could reveal his whereabouts, as if her naked flesh privy to his secrets. Sorry, sorry, he might whisper to his lost bride, to those victims he intended to serve. Then Thomas Gray intrudes, not his face picked out from the crowd. Thomas Gray's gray face, not seen from the scaffold this last morning. He's invisible as the other spectators, invisible as I had been while he read my so-called confession to the court at my trial. Confession Gray had written himself and claimed that I, the accused, had dictated to him. Gray's lying voice heard here again in this moment of truth, the moment people say no one dares violate with an untruth because death imminent and we fear God's all-knowing stare. I would relish an opportunity to watch the eyes of Thomas Gray, my inquisitor, lawyer, judge, jury, priest, executioner, as he variously styled himself. Watch his eyes consume, letter by letter, word by word, not the counterfeit confession he authored. Watch him pelted by the witness I bear, the truth of this unfolding tale I compose to occupy myself during these final minutes while I stand beneath a gallows fitted with 3 hooks and ropes, standing above a mob that now mutters and seethes as it grows more restless, impatient because I say nothing, my lips stones, though I believe in the instant Gray meets his creator, he must listen to every word I brew now, words scourging him, words streaming, stinging up from my belly to my heart, to my silent mouth this morning. May Thomas Gray hear my confession, not his, my words, not the words he's written and intends to publish for great profit, a businessman like others in the crowd who wait for my body to be cut down so they can strip patches of my skin, chunks of my flesh, and peddle them as Christians once peddled splinters of the true cross. As a boy, I learned to read, taught myself names of letters, sounds of letters that are also their names, learned the alphabet, A through Z. A equals an apple. Apple bitten ends darkness. Animals wake up to light, which is another dark. Animals see what they have never seen before, see themselves and see one another, and it's the beginning of the end, A through Z. Alone, not alone. A through Z begins with first taste of A for apple, first open eye, first glimpse of what a world is, what a person is not. World holds others like you and unlike you, creatures with nothing to do with you, separate like rivers, trees, mountains, sky, snow, a bird, shadows, and everything not you burns, roars loudly or silently, creatures hungry, hunt, haunt a world beginning and ending with the alphabet that begins with letter A, ends with letter Z. B equals book equals Bible. B, busy, bumblebee, buzzy, fuzzy, striped. B for bug with wings, stings, hives, honey, to be in pain. B, to begin to read the Bible letter by letter, because each letter a sound, the world an empire of sounds buzzing in your ears, noises people make, world makes, bee crawls, slow, striped black and yellow, and you catch it in your fist. Listen, crush, squash it. No buzz. Before it was a bug, a bee, but nothing now. Even when you open your fist, open your eyes, only darkness. Read dark, darker, darkest. Bible opens to letter A, to letter B, alpha to beta, A to Z. I read somewhere and learned to sound out names for God. Suckle at the alpha, beta, tit. Listen to blood red, white milk squeezed up sweet inside, singing inside warm pillow of skin. Sometimes it puts me to sleep, wakes me up in the deep down darkness, deep quiet again, being alone with only God again, still as a squashed bug, squashed bee. It's not him, not me, not it, broken, but because many, many bees, busy, busy bees, bee, bee, bee. You could spell a world with nothing but bee, beginning, begotten, baby, born, black, butt, big boy, bigger, best, best, blessed, bought, beaten, beast, behave, beg, blind, until he learns C, the next letter, and learns next and next creature, because black boy, A through Z, learns to read God's book. C. C with I. C sounds like C. I sounds like I. Eyes see. I see sounds like icy. Ice makes you slip and fall. Feet up overhead, head down under feet. Happy little white girls and boys bundled in bright, happy colors glide on ice in Little Miss book. What is ice? Ice cold, dummy. White, smooth, slippery ice. You slip and fall if you're not careful. Boom, down you go. See? I told you so, dummy. Crack your noggin. Crack your hard nigger noggin. I told you so. You better be careful, or when you see eyes, first time you fall. What is ice? Not nice. White, white eyes everywhere. Cold, colder, coldest after dark, after sun goes down. No ice here. See, it's there in picture book, God's snow and tall mountains and his children in bright colors, fast as deer, his cold ice and hot sand of his deserts you will never see. You sleep, fall asleep, and darkness wakes you. You see, eyes see pictures in books with pages you cannot turn. Pages turning too fast, too slow. Pictures with no pages, your eyes see, I see, you slip and fall, see nothing. Eyes cold white as God's ice everywhere. D for dread. Dream, did, dirty, deed. I did it. I admit I did. Did it, but swear I'm not happy or proud. I did it. The dirty deed. E. With about 40 E's lined up in a row, a long chain gang of E's, maybe different sizes, colors, shapes, colors, letters strung out one after another. Would the sound of all those E's make the sound of a mule? You might hear dusk or dawn, mad 'cause it's tired, hurt, broke, pissed, weary, tired of being whipped, winded, trembling at the knees, long mule neck aching so bad, not one more mule step left in skinny mule legs, emaciated mule muscles, nothing left to do except squeal ee until the final mule breath exits its mule-assed body, mule-assed soul. E. F. Father, fast, flee, freedom, friend, fount of wisdom, foundation, founder, fire, fear, flee, feast, famine, Father, forgive, fly me, far, far away. G, only one sound, one letter, and I am unworthy. They say I am forbidden to utter, to spell it. Only G, no other letters, only an empty space. G, for my God's name. If you believe you already know my story, perhaps you should stop here. The story you know suffices. You will discover nothing useful in what I have to relate, nothing that will raise doubts or supplant truths or untruths inside you that you have transported until your life's journey progressed to this point where you find me offering my alphabet, my tale, my confession, as if it begins here, gushing new like pure water from a pristine mountain stream, when both of us, though we speak separate languages, understand the fact my life, like yours, has been unraveling a long, long time, and we are both past the point of going back or starting over. Strangers in this moment, we might prefer to be a moment of truth. Strangers to each other and ourselves as we pass by, as we exchange words, weightless as strangers passing by. I decided to kill white people when the voice I hear sometimes in my head reasoning with me said, you don't need them. Need no one to tell me I am not one of them and never would be. Don't need masters. Do not need the heaven and hell in their churches, nor the hell on earth they make of this Virginia. Don't need fellow slaves, nor slave rags and slave rations and slave quarters. Don't need nasty sheep to tell me I am a nasty goat and don't belong in the sheep pen. I found it strange then, since I had been persuaded, agreed wholeheartedly, I thought, with the voice of reason. Strange that once I had commenced the killing. Strange that at first, each time my turn to strike a fatal blow, fear or panic or pity or something else I have yet to fathom caused me to hesitate. Standing over the bed of sleeping Joseph Travis, appropriately our first victim, since he was owner of the plantation on which I, leader of the plot, resided, I struck him several times with a hatchet, but Will's assistance necessary to dispatch him. When I attacked Miss Newsom with my sword, Will's implacable axe required again to deliver the fatal blow. In the side yard of her family's dwelling, Mrs. Margaret Whitehead grabbed my hand and pleaded, but I struck her numerous times with my sword, causing her to collapse to the ground, though she didn't die until I snatched up a loose fence railing and crushed her skull. Were these mishaps the result of small, inadequate weapons, or my novice's ineptitude at killing? Or did I hesitate, temper blows in each instance, because I still believed if I eradicated them, I might miss the presence of white people? I am called Nat Turner, a name made up for the convenience of sellers and purchasers of me, a made-up name like I invented a name for the voice inside me, calling it God's voice, when I endeavored to describe the source of words no one besides me able to hear. Though that source, I must admit, far beyond my poor wits to fathom, and remains impossible for me to explicate, I tried with all my powers to share the words of the source with my brethren in chains, attempted to convince them that if they listened carefully to words that seemed to issue from my lips, they would hear more than Nat Turner speaking. Prophecies and mysteries would descend upon all of us when we gathered in secret places, in the woods. White people do not change, will not change, so they have changed you, wrought you, bent, twisted, emptied you to be who you are. Are you someone you wish to be, or someone white people wish you to be? You are inside their plan, Nat Turner, but not inside them, Nat Turner. They are inside you. Remove them, remove yourself from their plan.
Thank you both. I have some audience questions on note cards, and we'll ask a few, and then the authors will be next door for a book signing. John, the first one is for you, but I think there's something in it for Liz as well. John, you once said the facts speak for themselves, but not for us. Is that where you see your responsibility as a storyteller beginning?
Are we long answers or short answers tonight? Yes, absolutely. The facts speak, but the facts always have a source. And the source is what empowers them, what gives them the status of facts. And I think I write all over the landscape of writing, composition, memoir, novel, essay, et cetera, because each one of those forms makes certain claims on the truth and certain claims about what's factual and what's factual. And I think the problem is built into the forms, it's built into the tradition of the forms, it's built into the prejudices and the assumptions those forms carry forward. And so as writer, I want my readers to be in some sort of tension with those very facts, the facts that make up the writing, that make the writing possible.
Liz, related to that, we got an audience question. People are always very curious when they read your work, where the origins of Olive Kitteridge come from. Are you Lucy Barton? So you're obviously mostly a fictional storyteller, but your readers really want to know what facts these fictions are based upon, and is that, do you find that troubling? Do you find that charming? How do you deal with that?
I just don't.
Short answers tonight. Here's another one for both of you. Liz, maybe you go first. Which do you rely on more as a writer, the eye or the ear? If you could step up a little bit to the mic.
That's an interesting question. I think probably the ear. I rely more on the ear in the actual writing of my pieces, but the eye. I mean, I'm looking always. I'm observing all the time. But the ear is what, the sound of the sentence is what conveys it to you, the reader. So the ear is very important.
John?
Different strokes for different folks. I hear you talking, man. I see what you mean. You know, we incorporate in our whole version of reality that the senses. But even in one small piece of discourse that I hear in a barbershop, see what you're saying is not right, man. I hear what you're saying, but I don't see it. Back and forth. That's the beauty. You don't pin these things down. The world is it's moving too fast. What you see is not what you hear. What you hear is not what you see. And good writing, I think, captures that.
Is there go ahead.
No, it's just that nothing stands still. We know that. Physics tells us that, I guess.
Is there a difference for you as far as capturing a voice of a character? Is there a difference in when you're say making something up almost entirely, or from the soup of life, versus say bringing somebody like Nat Turner back?
Well, I try to put myself in his mind. But what is a mind? What is a mind? I have a certain. I stated my intention, but now a good question would be, but what's his mind? And to what degree does he control that? And how can you speak to something that he probably could not put in a bag and take to the next town with him? It becomes just trying to catch up with the mystery, with the inexplicable, and should shut up because it can't catch up.
Do for both of you, do you feel you owe your characters something with a historical figure, with someone like Lewis Till? The answer maybe is different than with somebody like Olive. But I'm curious, when you sit down and these characters start to brim to life, what do you feel as your responsibility to them on the page?
Me?
Either one of you.
Well, I had not had a chance to read Liz's work until I knew we were going to be here. And I enjoyed her last book of stories, the one she read from, very much, and it's called Anything is Possible. But I think as I read into that book of many, many stories, many, many characters, it became quite clear to me that the writer, the person in control, both believed that and didn't believe it. And the tension of the book was that believing and not believing. And so that's where the book came alive for me. That's a pretty powerful statement, that anything can happen. And I was drawn by it, the same way I was drawn by the voice of the preacher in AME Homewood AME Zion Church. You're always looking. I'm always looking for something that gets me started, but then stops me because I don't have it. I don't have the answer. Yeah. So I got to keep asking the question. So I keep reading the book. I keep reading Anything Can Happen. Keep thinking about what that might mean.
Liz, you said Olive came to you because you looked out and there was a woman at a picnic table.
Right.
Is that something that is a common experience for you? These ideas come to you as characters or as something they may have said, and that's where you embark?
Yeah, I mean, they just kind of show up. Most of them just kind of show up. A lot of them show up a little bit, and it's like I'll look and see if they're really there. And if they're not, then they go on the floor. But if they are, then they stay. But what I owe my characters, back to your original question, I feel like I have to know the character really, really well. And then I feel like what I owe them is to allow them to be who they are. And that's very important. And I can remember when I was writing Olive Kittredge at one point, I thought, I don't know what the point was, but I remember thinking, oh, she's going too far. And then I remember thinking, no, let her be Olive. Just let her be Olive. So that's what I owe them, is the right to be who they are.
One last question, which is actually from the stack. John, you mentioned that these are troubling times, and this person wanted to know, as a reflection of that, what's different about what you're reading these days and what you're thinking about as far as future writing projects? Did anything, for example, in American Histories, you know, come from that place?
You mean, am I predicting the future in my own work and seeing it? I said when I came to the mic that these are troubled times. And so what fills me with wonder and horror and fear is that there is a very large wilderness, and whose voice is going to be picked up in that wilderness? Who can speak and be heard in that wilderness?
Liz, do you want to have the final word as far as the questioner asked? Do you find what you would tend to be picking up versus, are you reading more nonfiction these days? Are you reading more history these days? I think our audience is always interested in the intersection of writers reading lives and contemporary events. And if when you go back to the page, you find it more of a struggle, given what's a distraction out there.
Well, I think that that events that are occurring right now have affected me in that I'm not reading as much, generally. And I think because there's a scatteredness to my head. So, sorry, I'm just not reading quite as much as I've always read. And I think there may very well be a connection. But I'm still writing. But
Good.
It's odd not to be reading as much, because I've always read as much as I wrote, you know. Well, no, I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, great, that's it.
Sorry.
Let's sign books.
Okay.